to day 2 of the Migration Summit. My name is Lorraine Charles, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the summit and the executive director of NAML. The Migration Summit 2024, organized by MIT Emerging Talent, NAML, and Karam Foundation, is a week-long global convening designed to build bridges between diverse communities of displaced learners, universities, companies, social enterprises, policymakers, employers, and governments around key challenges and opportunities for refugee and migrant communities. This year, we're exploring the theme Unlocking and Engaging Talent, Pathways for Dignified Work, through virtual and in-person events hosted by participating organizations around the world. I'm really excited to invite a dear friend of mine who we arranged this panel when I was in Nairobi. I said, Rai, come on, you've got to do it. So I'm so excited that she's brought everyone together, and it's people that I know really well on the panel. So Rai, over to you. I'm really excited to hear you and your amazing speakers.
Thank you, Lorraine, so much for the kind introduction. That's really great. Hi, everyone. It's so good to see all of your faces. We're so excited about today's panel. I just wanted to say welcome and thank you so much for taking such an interest in migration governance and inclusive policies for refugees. This is something that is really, really important for the next wave of the refugee crisis in order to find durable solutions. So I prepared a presentation for you all today. My name is Rai Friedman. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Rights Defenders, which is an NGO that advocates for refugee and human rights worldwide. Today, our Migration Summit event is titled Normalizing Refugees' Rights to Meaningfully Participate, with a focus on migration governance and socio-economic inclusion. Today, I'm joined by our incredible panelists, Jamin Kusiania, Jamin, the Senior Advocacy Manager for the International Rescue Committee, Edith Ngutia, the Assistant Livelihood and Economic Officer for UNHCR, Jeffrey Ochola, the National Program Coordinator for the International Labor Organization, Samuel Binja Simanuka, the co-founder of Kalobeyei Initiative for Better Life, and Philip Uganda, the Program Officer for the Refugee Consortium of Kenya. Sorry, everyone. Okay, so what is migration governance? The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights defined it as a process in which the combined framework of legal norms and organizational structures regulate and shape how states act in response to international migration, addressing rights and responsibilities, and promoting international cooperation. It's a broad term which refers to different categories of migration with different policy frameworks. This includes labor migration, family migration, migration for studies, refugee and international protection status, and irregular migration. These categories are not regulated in the same way and do not involve the same actors or institutions. There are different fields of policy actions, from integration measures to facilitate access to employment for immigrants, and more. So what is global migration governance? It's the global policy was recast in 2015 after the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, which included the issue of migration in mainstream development policy. In 2015, we also saw the Syrian refugee crisis, where over 1 million Syrians reached European shorelines. Global leaders then decided to convene and said that we can't have so many people trying to reach safety and crossing water to do so. And so in 2016, world leaders convened in New York, which later became the 2016 New York Declaration, which formed the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, which was a tool that they used to support host countries, to support refugees, and it was the implementing framework to do so. Both of those documents informed what we now call the Global Compact for Refugees, which is meant to ease pressure on host countries, enhance refugee self-reliance, expand access to third country solutions, and to support conditions in countries of origin for return in safety and dignity. And basically, the Global Compact for Refugees is the legal or non-legally binding instrument that a lot of refugee policy is setting the initiative for global refugee policy in today's world. So although Kenya didn't adopt a formal comprehensive refugee response framework of these 4 tenets, to ease pressure on host countries, enhance refugee self-reliance. Although they didn't legally sign on to these 4 points, they came up with their own version of, or their own pillars of implementing the comprehensive refugee response framework. And those pillars were inspired by the New York Declaration, the Nairobi Declaration, the Djibouti and Kampala declarations, and then they were able to form their pillars. So enhance the protection space for asylum seekers and refugees, to support immediate and ongoing needs for asylum seekers, refugees, and host countries, and to promote regional cooperation and international responsibility sharing for durable solutions for refugees. So the refugee situation here in Kenya as of May 2024 is that there are over 700,000 registered refugees and asylum seekers. That means that there are 380,000 in Dadaab, there's over 288,000 in Kakuma, there's over 103,000 in urban areas. These refugees originate from Somalia, South Sudan, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ethiopia, and Burundi, as well as others. Kenya is the 5th largest refugee hosting country in Africa, and it's the 13th largest in the world. Majority of the refugees in Kenya live in protracted situations, meaning that they're often living in one of the 2 camps, which are Dadaab or Kakuma. And some refugees have been there since the opening of the camps, which was over 30 years ago. So Kenya's migration governance measures that we'll be discussing today are the Kalobeyei Integrated Settlement Development Plan, the New Refugees Act 2021, the Garissa Integrated Settlement Development Plan, and the Shirika Plan. Although these are not all of the measures that Kenya has here, these are the ones that we're going to focus on because they majority of them focus on socio-economic integration. And so without further ado, I will gladly hand off my question to my very first panelist, Jamin. If you could please describe what migration governance is and why is it important for countries which have large populations of displacement?
Thank you, Rai. Migration governance, as highlighted, is about systems, is about policies, is about frameworks, institutions, and more oftenly, it's also about practices on how do we then manage migration and displacements within the various countries where we have various forms of displacement. I think from the very onset, whether we are speaking about economic migrants, whether we are speaking about persons displaced by internally displaced people, whether we're speaking about refugees, then all those happen to be a whole hallmark of migrants and displaced populations. And so it's critical that then we have systems, we have frameworks that seek to look at how then do we manage these categories of people, how do they access their rights, how do we ensure safe, orderly, and regular migration as would be asked out there. And so I think the importance of this is not necessarily to countries that have a huge number of migrants or huge number of displaced populations, but I think it's something for all countries, whether we are dealing with labor migrants or we are dealing with economic migrants, whatever migrants they are. It is critical that we have this in place, but I think the burden is much higher to countries that have a huge number of migrants like Kenya, to ensure that then we have set structures to be able to deal with the huge number of persons that we definitely have. And why is it important? I think one, to ensure the human rights protection of this particular population, especially when they come from outside the country. How are they able to access services? How are they included within the national, within government structure for the access to services? How are they issued with documentations in terms of for them to be able to be identified within the borders where they have actually come into? How do we guarantee aspects of social cohesion within the country where they have come? How do we even plan for the populations that we have? Because then development is about planning for the numbers that you have within the borders. And so it's critical to see how then do you even plan for this particular population. And so all these particular issues are critical within the migration governance for the respective countries to be able to seek and see how they are planning on all these particular issues that are critical for the well-being not only of the displaced people themselves, but also for the socio and economic stability of the country where they go into.
That was a fantastic answer. Thank you so much. Jeffrey, why is it important to include refugees in socioeconomic activities?
Thank you so much, Rai, and I hope you can hear me clearly. Basically, I'll just pick it up from where Jamin has left on issues of social cohesion and economic integration. And from the ILO perspective, as you all know, we are advocates of decent work and social justice. And so this ties in well in terms of looking at how refugees are included within even the labor markets, and how refugees are even included into employment policies and diagnostics. So for me, quite key and most importantly is to see it from the angle of first, the economic benefits that comes with refugee populations being within a specific country, because now you're looking at the enterprises that are within these spaces, the businesses that have been developed within these spaces, looking also at the skills that the refugees are coming with. These potentially benefits the countries, the hosting countries in one way or another. And I would allude these also to some of the reports that have been done within the populations. Look at, Kakuma as a marketplace, and alluding to the, $1 million kind of economy. So this means in terms of, development and even provision of employment opportunities within those businesses that are within the Kakuma and Kakuma refugee camp. I'm also looking at it from the perspective, and just to reiterate what, Jamin has spoken about social cohesion. If you integrate refugees into socio-economic activities, that brings about peace most of the times with the populations that the host populations that they live in. It doesn't, they do not no longer look at refugees as mostly depending on the host country, but also the refugees are providing some sort of benefit to those host countries, and therefore it enhances that idea of peace and social cohesion. I'm also looking at another aspect of it in terms of just resilience building and issues of poverty reduction. We all know that humanitarian aid is going down, and so we need a little bit of development approach and development approach. The humanitarian development nexus advocates mostly on inclusion of refugees in our national plans. You just mentioned KISEDP, GISEDP, Shirika Plan. These are some of the innovative approaches that are really enhancing refugee inclusion into different policies, development plans within the counties and the national level. And so if they're included here, they're able to, depend on themselves, provide, livelihoods for themselves through, entrepreneurship support that then would be mainstreamed within the national systems and the county systems, access to job opportunities, but self and wage, which would really, alleviate them from over dependency on humanitarian aid, but more developing. And this speaks to also a little bit of, developing the value chains that refugees participate in, be it agriculture, be it trade. So we are just really strengthening those value chains to ensure that they are able to support. I'm looking at a commitment as a country as well. There's this commitment to international, standards and laws that are put together and acts as well. Looking at the Global Compact of Refugees, one of the things they advocate for is inclusion of refugees into different, national, structures, and Jamin has spoken about that. So I'm just looking at a fact that if we are able to, mainstream refugee participation within these structures, then we give them opportunities to access to different services, be it education, be it health, and at the same time, just strengthening the issue of them being able to compete on a fair ground with the nationals. And lastly, I'm going to speak about utilization of these skills and competencies that they have. I think for a longer time we've had refugees coming in with competencies and some skills that we've not exploited to a larger extent. And you find that if you conduct some labor market assessment, you understand that there are some skills that really employers are looking for that are part of employees' profile, but then we cannot utilize them because refugees are not really included in these labor markets. And so I'm just thinking about the aspect where we are able to utilize their talents, we are able to utilize their skills. And I was having a conversation a couple of weeks ago with colleagues on the creative economy, and we're just thinking about the traditional wares that refugees have, and the traditional wares that different ethnic groups within the refugee population have, and how can this be marketed even in the international markets and be able to provide such kind of things. So just a little bit of bringing them to fold and ensuring that these are fully exploited. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You touched on a lot of really important points, of course, following up with Jamin on social cohesion, but skills that refugees come in with, also reflecting later on the utilization of skills that are needed within the host countries for refugees to potentially fill that labor gap. So that's very much appreciated. Of course, you talked about resilience building, which is very, very important. But something I also wanted to touch on was you talked about peace building, which, as we know, the UNHCR High Commissioner Filippo Grandi was just here at the University of Nairobi discussing the future of refugee policy and naming Kenya as a leader, very much so highlighting peace. And so that's also something that all of us practitioners here in this call today should be considering and thinking about, because the refugee crisis won't stop unless we are able to find peace in places that have conflict. Edith, I would love to ask you my next question. How can we increase opportunities for displaced populations for meaningfully participate in the economy?
Thank you, Rai. As you're all aware, UNHCR's mandate is very easy. It's the International Protection Assistance and Durable Solutions. And you find that in all the processes and instruments that you've highlighted, it shows more geared towards durable solutions and engaging or increasing opportunities for possibly displaced people is not only a UNHCR role, it's multifaceted. It requires many multi-stakeholders, and also it requires strategies that really look at the various barriers and also looking at other potential opportunities to leverage. In the case of UNHCR in Kenya, we've been very privileged to have a very progressive regime over the years. And I can boldly say that because of the Refugee Act of 2021, and also we have the recognition of Prior Learning Act that has been assented and is actually being implemented, it is now easy to actually facilitate the issue of skills recognition and development. And I'll rejoin on what Jeff said, the issue of refugees coming from their countries of origin with professional skills and perhaps their certificates not being recognized. With this progressive development, it calls to action that we as players, we need to engage with the Kenya National Qualifications Authority and have them recognize professional certification, especially in key sectors, health, education, in that essence that we can actually truly speak of sustainability, because at the end of the day, currently Kakuma is a municipality and we've seen Shirika Plan is already on roll. What does that translate? For example, in Kakuma, it means that there are 0 camps, 0 settlements. Being a municipality, bringing Shirika into play, then that means we need to be looking at how we can recognize these skills. At the same time, UNHCR has been very intentional on working with various partners, and ILO is one of our partners in the Prospects Consortium, whereby we are looking at employment facilitation, job placement matching with our partners. If a partner is implementing on behalf of UNHCR and they are doing maybe the technical vocational training, we request and encourage them to ensure that there is that job transition from theory to practice. That one means now we also bring in the DRS who are able to facilitate movement for these communities or these targeted clients. and they are able actually to go out there and get the practice or the practical experience that is needed. Additionally, we cannot talk about increasing opportunities for refugees without talking of financial inclusion. When we talk of financial inclusion, is it empowering? Is it accessible? Is it affordable? What does that mean for different levels of refugees? So as Kakuma, and I'm glad that you mentioned about KISEDP, in as much as Shirika Plan is going to be the umbrella for KISEDP and GISEDP. In Kakuma, we've had a very good stroke of progress. And I can talk about financial inclusion in the example of having the Kakuma Kalobeyei Challenge Fund, a tripartite agreement between the government of Turkana government, the IFC and UNHCR. And we've had investments coming into the operation for over 124 different kinds of investments. We have multinationals, we have energy sector coming up, we have the construction sector playing a very big role. And we have also the local enterprise window, whereby the host and refugee community traders and businesses were able to be funded. What does that mean? There's that affordability. Currently, we can boast of having Kenya Banker Circle, something that was not in a refugee setting before, meaning there's affordable finance, microfinance. There's also a welcoming approach from the commercial banks that we have, Equity and Kenya Commercial Bank, whereby refugees can actually have bank accounts and are also able to access facilities when and if needed. At the same time, we have to look at the legal framework. You know, the legal framework has actually been in our favor. And I'm very excited of the Shirika Plan and see how it's going to roll out. And I believe that by the time November comes, then we'll have a rollout plan and have engagement with communities. I want also to recognize the Turkana County government. They've been very supportive in the essence that they lead most of the themes that we work on, and we align our programming around their CIDP. And for that reason, most of our activities are government-led. We have technical, thematic, and also working groups that are actually led by government. And this is a good show in the essence that government already has our buy-in. And for that reason, we implement like not in silos, but seamlessly together. And with that spirit of collaboration, we are able actually to meaningfully engage the refugee community. I can also say in line of the grand bargain, we've been able to, as UNHCR globally, the High Commissioner is very intentional in ensuring that refugee-led organizations mapping is ongoing. We have something called RIMA, and at country level, we are in the process of ensuring that we have a refugee advisory body. It's not yet finalized, but it's something that is ongoing, and we want to have refugees sit at the table and tell us what is it that they can actually be able to deliver. At this time, UNHCR looks at refugees as partners. We don't look at them as people in need, because when they flee, they come in as already a resource, and that resource needs to be used, put into good use, such that it benefits also the host community. And for example, in Kakuma, several RLOs are actually creating employment opportunities for the host community. And that is very impressive because they are the ones who take the initiative to fundraise. They take the initiative to come out and establish offices, look at intervention. And I think that is a good approach. And for that reason, it really requires all of us, not only UNHCR, but all of us in this panel and those outside. The private sector is very key. The financial institutions, development partners like GIZ are needed to be part of this process in order to ensure that refugees are meaningfully engaged. Thank you, and over.
Thank you so much. You touched on so many amazing things that UNHCR and its partners are doing, recognizing skills and really advocating for skills to be included here in the Kenyan society, financial inclusion and what that means for refugees, as well as getting a bank account, which is, as we all know, you need to have autonomy, and a bank account is absolutely part of that. analyzing legal frameworks and making sure that they are in our favor, although Edith already mentioned that they have been in our favor, that they maintain to be in our favor as well. And then lastly, the transition from refugee camps into settlements. And for people that aren't working in the Kenyan context, I just wanted to reiterate what the Kalobeyei Integrated Settlement Development Plan is and what the Garissa Integrated Settlement Development Plan is. Initially, the Kalobeyei, the KISEDP or KISEDP, UNHCR, the Ministry of Interior, and the Coordinator of National Government agreed with Turkana County, which is where Kakuma Refugee Camp is located, to develop a settlement which would promote self-reliance of refugees and the host community. The host community is known as the Turkana, by providing them with better livelihood opportunities and enhanced service delivery. And so basically it's a transition from refugee camps into a settlement, and Kenya is looking forward to being able to do that. That brings us to our next question to Samuel, who is a co-founder of a refugee-led organization in Kalobeyei. Samuel, what is the Kalobeyei Integrated Settlement, and how has living there enabled you to pursue entrepreneurism?
Yes, thank you so much, Rai, for the invitation, and I'm so much glad to share the panel with Geoffrey, Edith, and the rest. Straight to the point is that Kalobeyei Integrated Settlement is one of the innovations approaches that both the government of Kenya and UNHCR are being intentionally interested to have durable solution for refugees. They came up together and tried to see what is a best approach to ensure that refugees can enhance their self-reliance, but as well as to build that cohesion and cohabitation between refugees and the host communities. And back in 2016, that is when Kalobeyei Settlement was officially opened. And today, as we speak, Kalobeyei Settlement is a home of more than 40,000 refugees and asylum seekers from various countries, and me being part of as a resident of this good settlement. And Kalobeyei Settlement as well as has played a key role in terms of influencing policies, both administratively and as well as has also attracted more investors. And the way Edith talked about financial inclusion, the fact of microfinance coming in, the fact of as well, like today we have a lot of microfinances, we have Kakuma Kalobeyei Challenge Fund. All of those are the fruit of the pilot of the existence of Kalobeyei Settlement. But more beyond of that as well, today the existence of Kalobeyei has also influenced the policies, because according to me, Kalobeyei Settlement has influenced to have Kalobeyei the KISEDP plan, which is today I consider the mother of the Shirika Plan. Is all about integrating refugees, and also it influenced much the Refugee Act 2021. Because I remember sometimes back, even as a member of parliament, they came and talked to young people in Kalobeyei, looking at the opportunities, the challenges, and it's also influenced. So Kalobeyei has played a key role in terms of transitioning refugees from refugee camps to settlement. And that has been also an opportunity for many young refugees to be entrepreneurs, because already there is a possibility of accessing finance services. Like we have Kenya bankers, we have people having bank accounts. Even in Kalobeyei today, majority of humanitarian aid are being disbursed through the bank channels. And this has also helped refugees to be quietly economically self-reliant. But in terms of business, for me, Kalobeyei has influenced me a lot in terms of business as an entrepreneur, because it's reached a point whereby a lot of funds has been pumped in Kalobeyei for people to be economically integrated. And it's also enhanced, like, okay, a lot of people are making products, but they're also lacking the market for their products. And for me as an entrepreneur, it really influenced me to also, with my team at Kalobeyei Initiative, to come up with an idea of building up an e-commerce platform, which is under progress. And we believe that as soon as possible, we have tried some pilot. And last week, we shipped our 3rd shipping to USA with the local made products made by refugees and host communities. So it's under progress, and we are so much happy with that. And beyond the success, we also face some challenges still because today, refugees, basically entrepreneurs, they still face documentation challenge. And when we talk about documentation challenge, to be honest, the government of Kenya have made a good progress in terms of if you're going to Nairobi, you can get a movement pass. And I actually recognize the advocacy from UNHCR, Livelihood Department. But today, like business people, they're facing kind of challenges because they can't go outside the country for business trip, because for you to get international traveling document, you must have an invitation. What about those people who are just having a business trip? They want to go maybe to Uganda, they want to go to Ethiopia, they want to go to Tanzania to bring goods in the country, in the camp, and they are denied those documents because they don't have supportive document. I believe that is one of the key challenges that we have in Kalobeyei. But so far, so good. It's been a good approach. It's been a good learning strategy, not only for Kenya, not only for Africa, but for the global leaders in humanitarian space. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your answer, and it's really insightful hearing from you. For those of us participating today, the refugee-led organizations function kind of the same way as a nonprofit do. Of course, they rely on funding, but previously writing grants or proposals has been extremely restricted. And so the Kalobeyei initiative or integrated settlement has enabled funds to be available to refugee-led organizations so that they don't have to rely always on their international or local partners. And I know, for instance, that Samuel's organization, their previous recipient of the Refugee-Led Innovation Fund, which is a very, very big success. And so congratulations again, Samuel. I'd like to switch gears a little bit now to focus on the new Refugees Act, because of course these policies can't be in practice unless the law allows us to do so. And so Philip, I would love to ask you my next question. What would you say some of the largest gaps are that exist between the new Refugees Act 2021 and how it's being implemented on the ground?
Thank you, Rai. I hope I can be heard. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the Refugees Act of 2021 actually replaces the 2006 Act, and this follows numerous attempts to review the Act. And in 2017, the president refused to sign it into law, citing that there was no public to RCK, together with other actors and UNHCR and the task force went and lobbied members of the National Assembly and consulted amongst refugees, amongst members of the host communities, so that to come up with an act that spoke to the needs of both the communities and the refugees. So it attempted to resolve and respond to certain challenges that have been raised, such as integration, when you talk about freedom of movement, when you talk about equitable inclusion in the labor market, when you talk about shared use of resources of the host communities. And these are things that the previous act hadn't responded to. But albeit those beautiful provisions, there still remains more so between the law and the practice. And such gaps include what the earlier speaker was talking about in the discussion and documentation. And whereas the Act is looking at it that documents will be issued in an efficient and timely manner, we still experience a lot of delays in registration and issues. And sometimes refugees complain a lot about the 1517, difficulties in obtaining even the initial appointment. that lengthens the registration period, therefore enabling them not to be able to access basic services as early as possible. Because when you look at it, some services and some of the socio-economic integration goals, such as allowing, can only be accessed once you finish your stage. So that's once you become a refugee. So when there's that delay, these people are stuck in being an asylum seeker, and therefore they can't access other services. The other gap is on access to basic services, whereas, for instance, they have the right to access healthcare, education, and healthcare, education, and other services. They still that difficulty. They see that difficulty in accessing them because of the acceptability of their documents. I allowed the government, in terms of recognition of documents, issuing that notice to the effect that certain documents will be recognized, but then they still need for advocacy in towards all these other sectors, the health sector, the transport sector. When we a time back when we were doing issues with SGR accepting their refugee ID for transportation. So also that, whereas they have all these provision, all these rights to access all these services, they are able to be lack of awareness between other stakeholders, the bureaucratic hurdles in accessing this service. Some service holder will go ahead and require a letter of recommendation from BRS. So, over and above your ID, they'll still require you to get that recommendation letter to validate that ID that you hold actually can access this service. So that hinders their access to services. And then also when you look at Section 29, the Act is very particular about non-refoulement, and this is actually a core principle in refugee protection. But then despite this provision, we've seen numerous reports, forced returns to countries of origin, threats of deportation, especially threats of deportation, and most recently in the last 2 years, instances where refugees have been taken back.
No, that's okay. I just want to interrupt. It's really hard to hear your mic. It keeps coming in and out. Do you mind just going closer to your microphone? Because you're providing really wonderful answers and I can't hear them in its totality.
Okay, let me start from the third gap. The third gap is on the protection from refoulement. Section 29 is actually very good in prohibiting forced return. But in our current circumstances, in the news, we hear the reports of threats of deportation, and actually some refugees are being returned. Amnesty recently released a report on some 2 refugees that had been forcefully returned back to South Sudan, and also those that don't come into light. Also, when you look at during my last body. There's a lot of cases there on non-refoulement because there's a gap in there's the lack of awareness for both duty bearers along that route in terms of the principles of refugee protection. So whereas they get asylum seekers, their first reaction is to charge this. When they're charged, they are unlawfully penalized, and also they are at risk of being potentially returned back to the countries in which they face the persecution. Then, in terms of also interpretation and self-reliance, Section 28 encourages refugees to participate in labor, and it also provides that those who participate in gainful employment should be accessed. But then when you look at the implementation of integrating refugees into the labor force, there are difficulties in finding employment by these refugees because of the restrictive policies. A challenge we face currently is that when we try help refugees access work permit, sometimes they require for you to apply for the work, you need to have a PIN. And then on the flip side also, when you want to apply for a KRA PIN, they want you to show proof that you have a work permit. So it puts refugees in a limbo where they are not able to know what they should access first to be able to enable them access their other PIN. And also what the earlier speaker was talking about also, in terms of the movement passes and just largely also the CTD for refugees that also do cross-border trade. So for instance, they'd want you to show that you've gotten that business for them to give you the CTD, but then also when you apply for the business opportunity or for let's say you want to travel out for any other opportunity, they'd want you to show proof of the existence of that business. So you're in a limbo of you can't get one because you're missing the other, but to get the other you need the other. So that's also a very major gap between law and lastly also in terms of also protection of legal rights and personal security. When you look at section 15 that provides for non-penalization, and also section 12 that provides for refugees access to legal services. We have a lot of as a legal organization that is in terms of also legal advice and legal protection. We receive a lot of reports of incidents of harassment, incidents of arbitrary detention, incidents of arbitrary detention, and also when you look at also our CUCs, they really some of them have our courts, some of them have don't have the effective capacity to handle refugee issues effectively. So we for instance, during this border monitoring mission, come across courts that still rely on the Refugees Act to for example, charge refugees, which shouldn't be the case. So as RCK, what we continue to do, raise awareness around the existence of these new laws, its provisions and its implementation, both to the refugees as their right holders, so that they're able to defend.
Sorry, Philip, to interrupt. I'm not sure if it's only me, but I think we're struggling to hear the last part. So if you can get closer to the mic.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. If we can keep it on that pace. You start great and then it fades away.
Okay, so as RCK, what we're doing about these gaps is creating awareness on them. So by targeting the refugees themselves, they're able to understand what their rights are, so that they're able to ask of them from the duty bearers. And then when you look at, we also target duty bearers, so that they're able to understand what the law requires of them, and to also to seek that commitment to adherence of refugee law in the whole overall goal of creating an enabling environment. So that's it, that question.
Thank you so much, Philip. We really appreciate your answer. For technical difficulties can be challenging, but we really do appreciate your answer so much. Samuel, I would really like to ask you the next question. Can you please tell us what self-reliance is, and can you please describe the type of support that displaced persons need to be able to achieve it?
Thank you once again, Rai. I believe when we are talking about the self-reliance, it's a complex definition, because first it depends on the context where the word is applied to. But in our context, self-reliance means being independent to some basic need services. It means that refugees should be able to cover or be able to support themselves or their families to cover some expenses. For example, food. They shouldn't just be depending on the monthly aid provided by the UN. When we talk about the health, they shouldn't just depend on the few institutions that are over there. When you look at the legal access, they shouldn't just depend to NGOs, but should be able even to hire their own lawyers and be able to defend their rights and many other aspects. When we talk about the self-reliance and how can you support refugees, for me, I can give some very, very simple suggestions. One of them being to work and support refugee-led organizations. Because when I talk about to work and support, I don't mean to just call them for a workshop and say that, okay, we have engagements with refugee-led organizations. Have been in many various spaces whereby an NGO is saying, okay, we are supporting refugee-led organizations. We are working with refugee-led organizations in Kakuma, but as a person in Kakuma, you have never seen them interact with refugee-led organizations. So we want to see the meaningful engagement whereby refugees are capable to receive funding. It must be restricted or unrestricted funding so that they are able to run their programs. And I can acknowledge some organizations that have already started doing that, including the UNHCR through the Innovation Fund. Like, we need to support refugee-led organizations because they really understand what is up there. The second component is recognition of their skills and talent, as ILO is also trying to tackle it. Because we have a lot of people with skills, but papers, document is becoming an issue. So on that, we also acknowledge the progress with the Kenyan government. Third is to also build partnership with development partners like MasterCard Foundation, Hilton Foundations. And when I talk about building that, I mean that UNHCR, because they are already at that table, to bring them to also work with refugee-led organizations, because there is that gap between refugee-led organizations and some foundations because of policies and many other facts. But I believe UNHCR can sit down with them and show them that we trust them, we have worked with them, we share some working group together, they have good ideas they can support. And then another aspect is documentation. We have to look at the administrative gap. And the administrative gap in Kenya is that Kenya has good policies, and you'll agree with me. Kenya has good policies, but implementation of those policies, maybe if I can rate, is just 20% up to now. But we understand that policy requires funding, it requires effort, synergies, it comes with the cost. Every implementation comes with a cost. But I also feel like there is need for the government to work closer with refugee leaders. And working closer with refugee leaders is not just when refugee leaders are coming to seek services to them, but also they can come to refugee leaders or refugee-led organizations and try to understand what is the entry point whereby they can support in terms of either pushing the agenda of policies or bringing development actors on board. Because sometimes even some foundations, they will tell you, no, the policies in Kenya doesn't allow us to work in Kenya. It means that they're still fearing the government's texts and policies. So, and then we need really to also invest in refugee skills. What I mean by refugee skills, here we have a scenario whereby at Kalobeyei Initiative for Better Life, we are providing digital skills. And our end goal is to have these guys working, having digital jobs, or creating their digital enterprises. But the issue is that up to date, our graduates are not recognized by the government because they are not certified by the government entity. And that is another gap that how can we work with these refugee organizations to see the programs that they are running, and then UNHCR and other development partners to see how they can bring the government on board to do the assessment. And then we have that accreditation so that as much as we are providing this a lot of programs, they should be accredited in the Kenyan system. And lastly is about job creation. I want to appeal to all the humanitarian organizations to really open their hands to give refugees jobs, decent jobs. Because yes, true that the government has restrictions and many other stuff. We have seen a lot of organizations like UNICEF, UNHCR itself over there, like bringing refugees in form of volunteers, consultants, fellows, and many other stuff. And it has really enhanced a lot of, for those few got that chance, it really enhanced their chance of being self-reliant. And some of them today, they can pay for their hospital bills. They can even hire their own lawyers, they can even defend their own rights because they have that access to enough resources that can help them to be so much self-reliant. And if I can add as well is that try to build a strategy where the host community young people and refugee young people are coming together, enjoy these rights, because to be honest, it will not make sense to see only refugees being empowered while the host communities are left behind. It will be a source of conflict, it will be an economic crisis, and nothing will work out of that. So when I'm talking about this, let us also bring refugees and host community together to ensure that we have an inclusive and equitable communities where refugees can thrive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated that answer. And I know I just learned a lot from you. So thanks again for that. Jamin, I would love to ask you my next question and shift a little bit away from the KISEDP and from the New Refugees Act. And now maybe we can focus back on the Global Compact for Refugees and the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework. Kenya was mentioned as one of the pilot countries to implement the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, which includes things like easing pressure on host countries, enhancing refugees' self-reliance, expanding access to third country solutions, and to support conditions in countries of origin for return in safety and dignity. What are the key takeaway messages that international actors can learn from Kenya when trying to achieve the tenets listed in the CRRF?
Thank you. I think when you look at the objectives of the Global Compact for Refugees, for context purposes, Kenya has hosted a huge number of refugees now for the last 3 decades. And we currently have a population of close to 800,000 refugees. And so our situation has been one of protracted situation. And I think the objectives of the Global Compact for Refugees then came at a very good time, where then we need to ask ourselves the question, how do we deal with a population that is protracted for a long period of time, away from the traditional sense of dealing with refugees that we thought would be around for a few years and they'll go back to their own places. And so in terms of the lessons for international actors, it's both what more need to have been done, and secondly, it's about what is it that we have made strides as a country that other particular actors can be able to follow. When I see the 4 objectives of the Global Compact for Refugees, I note there are some of them that are then the country itself can be able to put measures in place to see that they are realized. There are others that are dependent on external actors and how we build solidarity towards this and see that they are achieved. And so maybe to point out the very first one, the easing pressure on host countries objective, I think what Kenya has been able to do over the last various decades is that we have had development partners standing with us to be able to support the refugee situation in the country. We have many implementing partners, we have many donors who So the country has suffered in that much in terms of the provision.
Hi, Jamin. I think we've lost you momentarily.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Rai is also frozen. Yeah, we go.
Yes.
You, that's right.
I think Jeffrey is also frozen. Let me message him.
Okay.
No,
No,
Jeffrey,
Jeffrey
he's
here,
not,
yeah.
he's not alone.
We
Okay.
have Edith and Jeffrey. Maybe it's a good time until they're back if you want to check some questions. We have some interesting ones in the comments.
Yes.
If like, yeah,
If you can reply some questions in the chat, Jeffrey.
cool. I saw one from Salvador, for example, to UNHCR. Do we have? No, I think we dropped.
Okay, maybe I can ask my question, Jeffrey. Can you tell me about, I know there's been talk about allowing refugees to get M-Pesa with their refugee ID. Has that been implemented as yet?
Thank you, Lorena. I saw that question and it's quick and quickly came top of the mind. I mean, yes, we've heard, and I think Edith mentioned on issues of financial inclusion and you know, the know your customer criteria that's at central bank that still raises issues because of the refugee documentation. I know the government has been able to, you know, kind of gazette, you know, several refugee documents that then would be able to enhance the registration of M-Pesa lines and including them into financial services. But it's a work in progress at the moment, because what's normally an issue is that then initially, even before the gazettement of these documents, refugees could not be able to access M-Pesa services because basically they couldn't meet that criteria at the central bank. But I think here it's an issue of more like sensitization of different government departments, and I think that is where that is you know that is basically the objectives of the Shirika Plan, that then if you are able to sensitize the different government departments of these documentation so that they kind of understand. And looking at the banking system, you have several banks, so they need to understand, you know, what this thing, then what it means in terms of the documents that will be able to support them to be able to register these IDs. At the moment, we're still using the same processes that the refugees used before. You know, there are those who get the process done, but there are those who use, you know, documentation from different other, you know, host community members to be able to register for this, but that's not sustainable anymore. And for me here, it's more of sensitization of these documentations to ensure that everybody is aligned and understands that then these documents are being able to be used in this scenario or specific scenarios where the documentation could be used. That would be my response.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Maybe Rai, I'll hand over to you again. We just responded to some questions in the chat. I'll hand over to you again, Rai.
Sorry about that, everybody. Yeah, thank you for filling in, Jeffrey. Is Jamin back as well? Did he finish?
He got cut off as well. He hasn't come back. So
Okay. No problem. It's unfortunate. Jamin's one of the most brilliant minds. Hopefully he'll be able to join us again soon. Edith, I would love to ask.
Sorry,
Oh.
I think he's with us. Just camera off. I don't know if he hears us. Yeah, Jamin. Yeah, no. Sorry, go on.
Go ahead, Rai.
Yes.
Sure. Jamin, if you're with us, I would just love to hear the end of your answer. If you're just able to summarize your answer for the key takeaways for the CRRF, and if you can make it concise so that we can wrap up in the next 15, that would be really, really helpful.
Maybe not.
Okay, we do
Okay.
have a hand raising, sorry.
Yeah.
And we do have few questions actually from the start. So we can
Maybe
see that-
should we get Salim and then go to the chat?
yes.
Salim, please unmute and turn your camera on and ask your question.
Yeah,
I'll not be able to turn on my camera, but
That's okay.
let me proceed with the question. There's an issue that most of the refugee the refugees raised, which was the issue of KRA. Some platforms integrated this the aspect of taxation into their platforms, requiring refugees now to pay taxes. Kindly, could you please shed light on this? How is this affecting them? It is something that they're complaining about, and it is something that's really, they have, raised these issues with us, especially to this community of practice that I've collected.
Salim, who's that question to? Or if anyone of the audience, anyone of the panel want to?
I will say, Jamin and also Geoffrey to respond to this.
Salim, I missed the last part of your question. If you could just, you just rephrase the question.
So the question is mainly about the KRA integration into platforms like Upwork and what's happening there. The platform are now requiring refugees to, to pay the taxation, this digital tax. So yes, please, I want you to talk about this, and what are the agencies and also other actors in the space are doing about this, and how can this be how can this be resolved in terms of we know that this is not something that used to happen in the space before, and it is something that is very new. It started around August 2023. And it is something that has come in our discussions whenever we're having discussions about how we can improve, how we can get more opportunities in the digital space. Yes, could you please respond to that?
Thank you so much. And Salim, one of the things that I'll roll you back to is, as you know, not only for refugees but also for the national space in terms of the digital economy, there hasn't been, real good regulatory frameworks that are supporting even the youth within the digital economy to be able to work in a better environment. And remember when this tax for digital work was put in place, and even digital labor market intermediators, some of them started even closing shop from Kenya and that kind of thing because of the taxation aspect. I think it's one of the things that even for ILO we are advocating for, and the advocacy is on the aspect that if you have really to tax refugees and even host communities or the citizens of Kenya within the digital economy, you need to respond also to the regulatory frameworks of the decent work deficits that exist within these economies, so that it makes sense for them, because tax comes in as you tax population, there needs to be value addition on whatever you're providing within these spaces. And I see Lorraine here, she's an expert in the same, and we've been discussing this within the community of practice, both in Kenya, but as well as global spheres, on what then does it mean in terms of, really supporting, creation of decent jobs within the digital economy. What does it mean in terms of, issues of unionization within the digital economy? Because some of these tax regimes, as they come in, you want to find yourself within trade unions to advocate jointly so that you are able to, say, yeah, we're going to pay taxes, but then these taxes should come with some form of benefits within that space as well. We've talked about issues of psychosocial support within the digital economy. So as you even tax them, the earners within that space, what are we doing in those realms as well? I'll just put it as such, because it's not only a targeted issue for refugees, but it's now something that's within the national sphere, and even different actors within are discussing this. And just so that I also pin this down for you, recently we did an audit of all regulatory frameworks that are really blind to the digital space and the digital economy, and this has also been shared within the National Labour Board as one of the things that they need to advocate for in terms of reforms. And I think it will also be a good thing for you, Salim, if the National Labour Board now finally gets, these policies streamlined. That means it's as an aspect of the inclusion of refugees. That means as you pay these taxes, you are at the end of the day closer to inclusion within the labor markets of the government of the country as well, because that's one of the ways that we'll be able to loop you into the labor markets. I hope I've been able to respond to your question.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. That was a really great answer. And it actually leads us right into our next question to Edith about integration and different enablers that allow us to work, especially in the digital economy. Edith, Kenya is a leader in the migration governance space. Could you please tell us what the Shirika Plan is, and what does it mean, and why is it innovative within the forced migration space?
Thank you very much, Rai. Shirika Plan, as we've had, it's a government-led process that is geared towards integration and ensuring that all refugee spaces are actually able to integrate refugees in wherever they are. And why is Shirika Plan important? I will take you back to the CRRF. We are talking about burden sharing. We are talking about communities being at the center of their solutions. And this is what it's all about, in the essence that given the shrinking donor funding and also the transition that we are working on towards the humanitarian development nexus, it can only be plausible when we start acting on some of the things that we said we are going to do. I'll give an example of how far Kenya has come. In 2019, during the first Global Refugee Forum, the government of Kenya only made 3 pledges about statelessness, about education, and all that. But given the result concluded, we see they made 7 pledges. And at that time, Shirika Plan was also brought to the global platform to demonstrate to other countries that integrating refugees is actually workable. And why are we saying it's workable? It's workable because we've seen the KISEDP example that Chimanuka has spoken to as living the experience. And you realize that the moment we are able to actually have refugees play a role in national planning systems and also in public participation, their voices do not disappear. So out of that, I'll say that the Shirika Plan is innovative, and I'm glad that Salim asked a very good question about paying taxes. We know that every country globally, its citizenry pays taxes, and it's taxes that also enable us to be able to get social services. And as a rejoinder, Jeff also reinforced that when you're paying taxes, you also need to know what are your benefits coming, what are the benefits coming back to you. So if you're paying a levy, the levy should be able to demonstrate the benefits that comes to you. So through the Shirika Plan, actually it means that close to 700,000 refugees and asylum seekers in Kenya are able, number one, to move freely. Number two, they are also able to provide their voice. Number three, they can actually be able to compete for opportunities that Kenyans have. Because without the Shirika Plan, will only be limited to the Refugee Act. And the Refugee Act on itself cannot actually deliver on the many needs and demands that any refugee hosting country needs to do. And for that reason, I will say that we need to be appreciative of this process in the essence that currently, as it starts, we acknowledge that it will have teething problems. But what does that mean for us? It means that we need also to bring on board the stakeholders to learn to roll out and to hear their voice. What is it that we can do better? Because if we never roll it out, we'll never know what the refugees need, you know? And that means that we'll be working and shooting from the dark, assuming that refugees probably need food rations. Is that dignifying enough, not being given the choice to have the nutrition that you need? But when you are having a voice, then definitely you'll be able to say, what is dignifying for me is getting a space on the table and contributing to this platform. And I'm happy that I've seen colleagues from DRS in this platform, in this session. And that means that DRS has really come a long way. DRS is the Department of Refugee Services. And being at the forefront, you'll realize that during the Shirika Plan, they have played a very critical role in ensuring that refugees are actually included, looking at opportunities that will definitely affect them, and how best can we integrate them into the system. And for that reason, I think we need to be open-minded and also be willing to work with the government. Because if we work with the government, then we are able also to support them and see how best we can implement and roll out better. I hope I've answered your question. Thank you.
You answered it tenfold. Thank you, Edith, so much for shedding light on that and for speaking so openly about it. It was really great. Just to make sure that we're saving time and that we're meeting our schedule today, I'm going to ask my last question to Jeffrey. What are the prospects of the Shirika Plan for promoting socio-economic inclusion for refugees? And why is it crucial to ensure Kenya's commitment to support immediate and ongoing needs for asylum seekers, refugees, and host communities?
Thank you so much, Ryan. I'll start from where Edith has left. A very good presentation, Edith, on Shirika Plan and its objectives, as well as the pillars that we foresee. I mean, for Kenya, we think this is one of the most innovative approaches that the government is picking up to ensure that social economic inclusion for refugees. And basically, for me, its prospects, of course, stand from the fact that we have the 5 pillars of Shirika Plan, basically looking at regulatory frameworks. How are we going to include refugees in government services? How are we going to support them in terms of skills development and market systems development approaches? And how are we going to ensure that we have this integrated way of working together as both government but also developmental actors? So key for me, why I see it has a lot of prospects in the country, is the issue of the regulatory framework. You've heard from Salim's question looking at the digital economy. You've heard Samuel also talk about issues of inclusion in policy frameworks and legal frameworks to ensure that refugees are included. We've also heard from Edith speaking about what it means in terms of that inclusion. So I feel that once we do, and there was a mention of an audit actually once we are operationalizing Shirika Plan. So I think this will be very important so that we are able to unpack the different government regulations, the different policies. Ogoda has also spoken about what are the challenges, what are the gaps within the Refugee Act, and how can we be able to unpack that and sensitize communities towards really filling in the gaps and ensuring that it's proper inclusion of refugees. So I think that is one of the major the major, contribution of Shirika Plan in the refugee context and, forced displacement. The other one, I'm looking at the fact of issues of quality of life. One of the pillars of the Shirika Plan is the integrated services, which includes all government basic services. Samuel has talked about it. We need just inclusion in basic services so that we enhance resilience, livelihoods are supported, and that kind of thing. And when you look at integrated services, there was a mention of social protection systems, health, there's a mention of education, things that are mentioned within this, the United Nations Sustainable Development, goals. And some of the things that are for us as ILO, it's the basic needs that, any human being or any citizen needs to be able to access. And I think that inclusion aspect into these frameworks, then it sorts out the issue of financial inclusion. Because you already accessing, if you are accessing NHIF, if you're accessing NSSF, you are able to definitely access other services that are being provided by government and to a larger extent inclusion. I'm also looking at, really its tenants being, anchored on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And here looking at the goal on decent work, which is very key. As we create job opportunities, as we create employment opportunities, are they decent enough for the refugees? There's a mention of, the approaches that UNHCR is using to bring refugees to employment, employment opportunities, to provide employment opportunities. But there's a biggest component where we are looking at the labor market and really synchronizing some of the job opportunities that exist here and what are the entry points for refugees. But at the same time, as we look at entry points for refugees, you're looking at the decent components of these entry points so that we do not get refugees into employment, but then they are also in decent employment opportunities, because that is actually doing more harm than good at the end of the day. I'm also looking at the issue of the comprehensive approach to it. And the comprehensive approach to me is really enlisting what my colleague Edith has spoken about. So we are looking at skills development. Are we recognizing those skills? Are we training them? Are we retooling refugees? Are we upgrading their skills to be able to get into the labor market? You're looking at issues of entrepreneurship support. What are we doing to grow businesses? Are we starting new businesses? Are we growing these businesses? Are we ensuring that these businesses are able to, access markets? When you talk about market linkages and access to market opportunities, and so Shirika Plan has these components. And even, social protection schemes, how do we loop in refugees into the different social protection schemes? Just recently, we had the inclusion of the informal sector, the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, of course, specifically the State Department of Social Protection, just launched a strategy on inclusion of informal workers into the social protection schemes. So how can we bring in refugees into this? And these are kind of the low-hanging fruits that Shirika Plan will be able to bounce back on and really enhance refugee inclusion. And lastly, for me, Rai, is the collaborative action, something that we've not been doing, as partly for government, but also for developmental actors, bringing all arms of government on deck, so that as we talk about refugee inclusion, we have Ministry of Interior, basic reason, work permits, migration needs to be on the table to speak about this, education, access to education services, they need to be on the table, health, so that we are having one discussion and it's all government approach towards refugee inclusion and Shirika Plan, and that's what it provides. But as well as developmental actors and donors, because this needs money, and Edith has spoken about that, because it's this ambitious plan that needs a lot of funding. So how do we coordinate ourselves as UN partners, as developmental actors, to put our money towards achieving these objectives and tenets of the Shirika Plan? And for all reasons, of course, it's for economic development, it's for resilience building, it's for social cohesion, and of course, just ensuring that we are able to provide refugees with better livelihoods and better working conditions within the spaces that they live in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you wrapped up the session today perfectly. You touched on a lot of the key points that almost all panelists discussed today. focusing on skills development and meaningful inclusion with decent work, that was talked about by all panelists today, inclusive policies and laws, that was talked by all panelists today, and collaborative action was talked about by all panelists today in different capacities. And so I think your answer there really did a perfect job of summing everything up. To our colleagues who had internet connectivity issues, I apologize. We're at the end of our session today. I wish that there was so much more time to share some insight from your perspectives, but I thank you all so much for joining me on this panel today. I also thank the Migration Summit for organizing this panel event. We had a big turnout. We're really, really proud of that. It took a lot of administrative work, so thank you to the summit. And I would like to hand it off to either Isabel or Lorraine to give closing remarks, but otherwise, thank you so much. And we hope to see you throughout the summit.
Thank you, Rai, and everyone on the panel, Geoffrey, Edith, Jermaine, like really fascinating. We can talk about this forever. In the next panel, in 8 minutes, we have the conversation will continue about Kenya on digital livelihoods, looking at enabling factors and sort of the context around digital employment for refugees. So join us in the next panel. Thank you all. This session is recorded. It will be on YouTube. So thank you all for everything today and see you all soon in Kenya soon. Bye, everyone.